about a medium to medium hard schedule. What are your thoughts on Ohio State?
Yeah, I think that win total is just set just perfectly. I wouldn't bet that win total either way. I think Ohio State, I mean, everybody knows they have great talent. There's plenty of talent here. Let's not kid ourselves. Ryan Day is walking into a pretty good situation. Having said that, there are a lot of question marks about this team. And I think the most important thing that you said there, that the defense was really not good last year. I mean, to be that bad defensively that you're 72nd in the country in yards per play allowed, 79th in yards per carry allowed, really, really weak. And in the red zone, their defense was just terrible. I mean, they didn't stop anybody when they got in the red zone, didn't force turnovers down there, team scoring too many touchdowns instead of field goals. That's things that Ohio State's usually good at. That was a major weakness last year. I think this team was very fortunate to go 13-1 last year. This is a team that all their stats were not as good as their record. I think they kind of underachieved just from a statistical standpoint. So now you bring in Justin Fields. It's a totally different look at quarterback. I mean, he's not going to throw the ball around like Dwayne Haskins did. Stephen A. Smith might think that Dwayne Haskins is a good runner, but Dwayne Haskins is a good passer. And Justin Fields is, he's the runner. He's going to do a lot more running. He won't be able to throw like Haskins. At running back, I think Dobbins is good. I think he had a little bit of a disappointing year compared to his freshman season there last year. I think the concern for Ohio State in the offense is their offensive line. They lose quite a bit from the offensive line. The offensive line really wasn't that great last year either, so you wouldn't necessarily say that it would be a huge step back. But I think Ohio State has questions about whether that offensive line will be able to open up enough holes for Justin Fields, J.K. Dobbins. They have some playmakers on the outside. I trust Ryan Day to think that this offense is going to be good. The defense, I think, will be better than last year. I don't think it's going to jump up and be a top 10 defense or something like they had there a few years ago. I think there's enough unknowns here about Ohio State that it's a pretty easy pass on a season win total.
Absolutely. And only being at plus 110 to win the Big Ten is absolutely insane. I think you can get way better odds just betting them throughout the regular season, money line wise, not even just rolling it over, just money line every single game. If you think that they're going to win the Big Ten, 10-1 to win the championship this year, I don't think is good either. So I'm glad we're in agreement there. And moving on to the next team, a close second here. I have the Michigan Wolverines, power rated very close to Ohio State, but a little bit under last year's power rating. I think I had similar to the 20 area. The returning offensive production is 76%. That Shea Patterson stayed. Returning defensive production's at 50%. So chop that in half. 6.09 yards per play last year. Gave up 4.58. Except, of course, when they played Ohio State, as we all saw. But throughout the season, they had a net positive of 1.5 yards per play. Consistency on the coach with Jim Harbaugh, Shea Patterson, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Tariq Black at receiver. They'll have some new running backs there with True Wilson and Christian Turner. A couple new tight ends, Nick Eubanks, Sean McCown, I believe his name is. 8-5. Let's see here. They are 6-7 against the spread. They have a medium hard schedule. They do host Ohio State, but their season win total is close to Ohio State. It's 9.5, 10 in many places. My number is a 9.5-ish. I don't think there's a ton of value here either. And losing guys like Devin Bush, Rashawn Gary on their defense, and they lost Chris Evans at running back, Ron Higdon. I think their schedule is still a little hard. They still have to play Notre Dame and Penn State, Michigan State, Wisconsin. I got it at 9.5. Do you have any thoughts on it?
Again, I think this season win total is right on. Michigan, obviously not my favorite team, being a Buckeyes fan, but, objectively, I think their offense will be better this year. I like the offensive coordinator hire of Gaddis. Over the years, if you've watched Jim Harbaugh's offense at Michigan, they're just not innovative enough. They play too slowly. There's been many games that Michigan's losing, and they're not even speeding up their pace in the fourth quarter. I mean, you got to change something. Let's get going. Shea Patterson's used to that faster pace, based on where he played there in the SEC. I think that's a good change for them. I do think their offense will be probably a good amount better than they were last year. Michigan had some trouble offensively in some key games, especially on the road last year. Patterson's a good quarterback. I think he'll be better this season. The question for Michigan, like you said, is they're replacing a lot on defense. Now, I think Michigan's defense is going to be very good, but we can't expect the same type of numbers from them as last year. Another big loss for that defense was Chase Winovich. He was in on everything. This is a Michigan team that I'm pretty high on, but I'm still cautious about Jim Harbaugh in those big games. He has picked up a couple bigger wins, but he has not been highly successful in the team's biggest games. And, Harbaugh did a great job at Stanford. He's recruited really well at Michigan. Could he break through and have a great year this year? It certainly is possible. Ohio State has enough unknowns. They host Ohio State. They get a lot of their toughest opponents outside of Wisconsin and Penn State at home. So I think it's set up for Michigan to have a chance here. So let's see if Harbaugh can prove himself this year.
Absolutely. And their non-conference schedule isn't too bad, minus Notre Dame. But the Army game, if Army's anywhere as good or better than last year, this could be a trap game for them because they play at Wisconsin after that. So just be looking at that game on September 2nd when they play Army. Army slows the ball down, speeds up the clock running the ball. If there's a big spread here, I might start leaning towards the Army way. We'll see what happens when that thing comes out, but that's an interesting spot I saw on their schedule. 13.5 to 16-1 is what I saw to win the NCAA championship. That's crazy. If they play Clemson and Alabama right now at their power rating, they're laying minus 400 to 600. Both those games. So I think those are terrible odds as well. I don't see no future price that's valuable there in the East, which you have those big teams. So definitely passing on Michigan, my man. Any final thoughts?
I agree. I don't see any futures value there. I think there's certainly a chance that Michigan can make a good run. If they break out, would it be stunning? No, it wouldn't. But I just don't see enough value in that number.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I'm going to blow your mind a little bit on this next one, Kyle. And I'm sure most people would agree with me. But I have a bunch of teams bunched up in the next level. As a matter of fact, if I look at the Big Ten West and I look at them as a whole, not individual, as a whole, I think the Big Ten West finally, as a whole, might be better than the Big Ten East. As we know, the Big Ten East still has Indiana, Rutgers, and Maryland there. The worst team in the Big Ten West is Illinois, and then that Purdue's been better, Northwestern's been better, Nebraska's the hype team. So as a whole, I've seen some improvement, but I have the Michigan States, Iowa's, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Minnesota bunched up in my power rankings, very close to each other. So I'm going to blow your mind a little bit on this one. And it pains me to be a Badger fan and say this, but I have Minnesota ranked next. And
wow.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, here's my argument, and you can tell me if it holds any water. Now, they're definitely 5-6 points under Michigan here in the power rating, but they return 90% of their offensive production last year. Still a little bit of a quarterback controversy with Anstead and I believe Morgan over there, but they return 66% of their defensive production. Yards per play, they were not good. They were at a net negative minus 0.25, but PJ Fleck is now in his third year. Tyler Johnson is a very good wide receiver that should be playing on some Sundays. They return their running backs, Rodney Smith and Shannon Brooks. Their running backs last year were extremely hurt. They tore their ACLs. Other injuries that they had was their main guy, Antoine Winfield, on safety. And when he went out, they gave up a ton. But how did Minnesota finish the season, right? They had that terrible game last year against Illinois. And then all of a sudden, they go to Wisconsin, right? They go to Wisconsin and they blow out the Badgers. They blow them out 37-15. I watched every single minute of that game, of course, being a Badger fan. And Wisconsin could not stop them. Now, Wisconsin was very injured as well, but either way, Minnesota had their way with them, and they looked poised and they looked good. It was a switch, right? Then they go in the quick lane bowl, and I usually don't take bowls, for granted, right? I don't really give too much for a bowl win or loss, especially if it comes to a situation where there's no motivation. Well, Georgia Tech had every single reason to win that game because their coach was leaving that year. This was their, everyone's like on Georgia Tech because they're going to, win one for the Gipper type deal. Minnesota blew them out 34-10. Georgia Tech couldn't even move the ball against them. And I've seen, Georgia Tech throughout the end of the year get a lot better on their rushing game. And I was absolutely shocked by that. When I look at Minnesota here and their schedule, Kyle, the only tough East team they play out of Michigan State, Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State is Penn State at home. They avoid the other three. Penn State lost their quarterback. They lost Miles Sanders, and Joe Moorhead is his next year being gone. I got to tell you, man, hosting Wisconsin this year and hosting Nebraska this year, I think could prove huge for this team. I gave this out to premium subscribers of the Odds Breakers at 70-1 to win the Big Ten. Well, it's down to about 30-1. I think they go way over their win total, which was about 7.5, probably a little bit higher now. I think if there's any, if you look from a pure value standpoint of how mixed the Big Ten West is, I think Minnesota's got just as much of a shot as anybody else, and I love their number. Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, so I wouldn't have Minnesota power rated third. Definitely, I think that's too high for Minnesota. Michigan State is my third power rated team in this conference, but I'm going to agree and disagree with parts of what you say, and I'll say that I like the Minnesota over 7.5, minus 125 at bookmaker right now. I think that's a good price. I agree with your thoughts about the schedule, and that's the biggest thing for me. I mean, look at who they miss out. They miss out on playing. They don't have to play Ohio State, Michigan, or Michigan State. I mean, those are, in my opinion, the three best teams in the Big Ten. So, you're missing out on those three teams. They go to play Fresno State in the non-conference. I don't think Fresno State's going to be as good as they have been. They lost a lot, and they host South Dakota State and Georgia Southern. Minnesota's schedule sets up very favorably. You go down and look through the first 6 or 8 games, and you try to figure out. I mean, they could have a really good record, halfway through the season, more than halfway through the season. Then they play at Iowa, at Northwestern, Wisconsin, Penn State at home also in there. So the last 4 games are a lot trickier, but I think Minnesota's going to rack up some wins here in the early going. I don't think they're as good a team as what you have them rated, but I like their season win total over. The thing I do like about this team is, at the end of the year last year, they had Joe Rossi as the defensive coordinator. And before he took over, if I remember correctly, I think they had just lost to Illinois in the game before they had Illinois 55-31. Yep. They lost to Illinois 55-31. I remember that game pretty well, thinking, wow, I mean, how far have they fallen? And then they run off, beat Purdue 41-10. They lose to Northwestern in a close one. They blow out Wisconsin on the road.
And that Northwestern game, Kyle, was a flat spot for them, kind of. They blew up Purdue, and they got their revenge, after having that terrible Illinois game, looking ahead to Wisconsin and getting that axe back after 20 years or whatever it's been. So I give them a little bit of a pass for that.
Yeah, I would too. And they were -3 in turnover margin in that game, basically even on yards. So Minnesota played really well down the stretch. They averaged giving up only 14.8 points per game in their last 4 contests. And really, like I said, that was against quality competition. Now, do you really think they're going to repeat that? No, I don't think they're going to be able to repeat that. But I will say, I want to echo your sentiments on Antoine Winfield Jr. He is really, really good. I think he makes a big difference in the secondary here. As long as he stays healthy, this pass defense is going to be a lot better than they were last year. I think my question mark for Minnesota, can they stop the run? They allowed 5.17 yards per carry a year ago. I still think that's the team's biggest weakness. Offensively, I think their quarterback play will be better. I think that both of their guys played pretty well at quarterback there for being youngsters last year. I think they'll run the ball pretty well. I like their offensive line, and I like PJ Fleck. So I think Minnesota, like I said, will rack up wins in the early going. I don't think they're quite as good as some of the other teams, but I think the schedule sets up really nicely for them.
Yeah, I agree with you about stopping the run. The good news is they do return Kamal Martin and Thomas Barber, and those were their linebackers last year. Hopefully that